Youth sport is a billion-dollar industry. Athletic development plays a significant role in that. I'm your host, Nathan Parnham, athletic development coach and author of The Sporting Parent. Here, I'll share my thoughts on youth athletic development. Welcome to The Get Down, a podcast for parents, coaches, and schools involved in the youth sporting landscape to help set your athletes or programs up for success. Before we get stuck into today's episode, I just want to give a huge thanks to our platinum sponsor, PLAE. PLAE is a global leader in high-performance fit-outs. I've worked with a team at PLAE for many years now, not only due to the quality of products, but because I fundamentally align with their vision to inspire human performance. From their industry-proven athletic flooring, Icon X racks, to their equipment line, they are a testament to what high performance is all about. Check them out at PLAE.us or on social media to learn more, including our show notes for further information.
1, 2, 3, 4.
A big thanks to our guest episode sponsor, GymAware. GymAware is the #1 velocity-based training company in the market. They've been around for over 22 years and are deservingly synonymous with VBT. GymAware Flex, in particular, is greatly desired by high schools due to its modest price point, ease of use with youth athletes, and for me personally, in these environments, it suits multiple purposes, which I've highlighted in episode number 3, the necessity in choosing technology for that reason in the school setting. GymAware has an exclusive offer for listeners of the Get Down podcast, offering 5% off any individual Flex unit using the code GETDOWN5 at checkout. Shane Gooneratne is currently the Chief Growth Officer for PLAE, the equipment and fit-out specialist within the health, well-being, fitness industry, and athletic performance realm. Shane has held multiple roles for PLAE since 2016 and has been involved with some incredible builds on a world-class level. I originally met Shane several years ago on a project at a previous school I was working with, and it immediately stood out his vision for the industry, relentless work ethic, and his sincerity in how he approaches life. Not only has it been an amazing experience to watch the growth of PLAE over the years, but the instrumental role Shane has had in it, along with raising the bar, so to speak, with our industry standards and their contribution to coaches and their craft through events, through to resources provided. I'm really excited to get Shane on and share his opinions on the industry and where it stands for the future. Strap yourself in and take a listen to this bonus episode, one that had to be done. Shane, welcome to the Get Down.
Appreciate it, mate. Appreciate you having me on. I've been looking forward to it.
So you're an extremely busy guy, and I've promised you that I'm going to keep our time limited so you can get on with your day. So I want to jump straight in with this. So the first question I've got for you is, I suppose you've been involved with building numerous facilities around the world, involving numerous sports clubs, tech companies, government agencies, schools, through to commercial health clubs. Obviously, every space is unique in their own environment and the constraints that come with that. But for you personally, which facility stands out the most that you've been involved with, and why?
It's a tough one, Nate, because in my role, I'm fortunate to be able to travel and see a ton of projects around the world. I think there's a couple that really like a milestone moments. Partly, there's an element of validation for myself and where we were going as a business at the time. I think the 3 I'd shout out are Loughborough University, Shaw School in Sydney, mixed with Coomer Anglican over here. And then there's this actually private performance facility, MCAP, we did in Melbourne with Adam Larkham. They were standouts partly because there was a real shared vision. I think like Loughborough is a really unique circumstance. It was our first job in the UK. And for me, like to land someone like that and to partner with them is so early in our, I guess, existence. But it was just the collaboration with the stakeholders. It wasn't about how pretty or how big the facility was. Generally, it's always about the experience and the people you get to work with. And they were standout moments for us, and kind of, I think helped validate a lot of the vision we had, and particularly in my role, I was looking over international at that time, and it was a lot of validation on where we could go as a brand and where the market could go, but the people that were involved on the other side are really what made those, regardless of how good they look. But super fortunate in that sense.
Yeah, I think that's definitely something with PLAE that stands out is, a lot of people will see all the flashy facilities and all the online stuff that we're grateful for in seeing in social media these days and having access. But something that I think that you guys do really well is it's not necessarily about what pieces of equipment we can just jam in there, but it's actually the collaboration of those projects. And I think you've really cemented it with what you've said there in that it's about the collaboration and the shared vision as opposed to what the common mistake can be, trying to kind of jam as many pieces of equipment into facilities as possible, which I suppose we can get into later on in the conversation, which I know a lot of the listeners are looking forward to hearing from. So amongst all the different countries and things like that, like part of your job is admirable from afar in that, I suppose, envious in a way that you get to travel the world. And I'm sure it definitely has its challenges that come with it. But I suppose every country through to culture and things that come with that have their own unique, I suppose you could call them sporting cultures. And that includes those facilities that aren't necessarily directly related to sport. You've done tech companies, you've done government and agencies and things like that. Understanding what that looks like regarding athletic development and thus building a central space around the world, I suppose, can you shed some light to those who are listening that perhaps haven't been as fortunate as you to travel the world and see the many places and countries that you have? What really stands out to you in your time from, I suppose, in Australia through to the USA and Canada, Europe and Asia? Are there any significant differences between those countries that you've been, I suppose, had the experience to gain some insights into?
Absolutely. I mean, there's like between Australia and the UK, there's a lot of commonality, like particularly from the way the coaches operate, the structure of coaching over there in professional sport. I think like it's hard to single out. I mean, Australia, the athletic development space, and particularly in the schools, you can definitely see there's more a collective investment in that space here locally. And I think it's actually really inspiring to see what's happening and how Australia could inspire the UK and likewise you see in the US. I think culturally the US has just got such a strong foundational element with youth development, whether it's in the midst of like a public state school that has got, one of the first weight rooms I went through was Noblesville High School in Indianapolis in 2016 when I first went over to see PLAE, and I was blown away. Public high school, middle of nowhere, but probably one of the best weight rooms I've seen. And it's just done so early there, and it's so foundational, and it's just normal to have a strength coach and a performance team in a high school setting very, very early on. Whereas in Australia it was just starting to happen. I think someone like yourself has been helped develop and push that, and the people that I think are supporting that are continuing to grow. But the culture in the States is something I've grown to admire on how devoted they are to youth development and sport. And you can see it in the private sector, with the likes of D1 and Redline, they're building facilities specifically around youth development. Don't get me wrong, they got the population, but it's just ingrained. It's ingrained in their culture, and they just know how to move so early. That's probably taken me back a lot.
Yeah, I think something that's because I've heard you mention this before, and I was having a conversation with someone on the weekend about this actually, is in Australia, and this is why I think it's cool because the listeners out there, there's listeners to this podcast who are listening from all around the world. And often we can kind of pigeonhole to Australia or to the US and things like that. Something that I was talking about on the weekend with this particular colleague was that they were shocked because, say, for example, in Australia, a lot of people will kind of, for lack of a better term, bastardize it and say, oh, you private schools, you guys are the ones who've got all the money, blah, 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 which I can understand and I can empathize with at times. But from what you've told me previously and exactly what you've just said here is that in the States, it's actually the public schools that are big. Because I distinctly remember that high school that you mentioned and seeing that a couple of years ago, thinking, and I think I might have even replied to you saying, what is this? And and you've just confirmed it that it's actually the public schools over there that are investing in that. What's the difference between the public school and the private school setups over there?
I think there's an element of like the exposure. I mean, in terms of the facility size, there's the glitz and glamour. At the core of it, they're very similar weight rooms. They're no different to what we'd see in elite sport here or we'd see in a school setting here. I think it's the what's around it that changes, the fields they have on offer and all of that. But at the heart of it, the weight room's like, it's just the strength coach, the weight room. That's ingrained in every school that I've been a part of. There's a school, Dalton High School. It's not too far from our office in Georgia, and I was fortunate enough to go there. When I went in there, the coach trains however many sports. He's all there all day. They've got a nice big turf space next to it, but I'd say it's like better than most of our weight rooms here. And it's not a private school that's generating this many Olympic athletes. It's just that is part of their core from a sporting standpoint. I think what's different is the exposure. Like Rich Gray, I hope he doesn't mind me saying this, but he's part of a high school association. He's actually the president of it over there. But his son, I was amazed at the exposure they get at the high school level from just playing local sport against different schools and the competition, the camaraderie. It's just ingrained at that level. I was quite jealous because, working in this space now, I wish I had that when I was in school. Not old as you, mate, so it's not too recent. But, I wish we had that over in what's in the States. I wish we had that here and in the UK. It's just, you could see why they're being so successful at it.
And I was really fortunate to meet Rich. I'm glad you said it, actually, because I was going to give that's the High School Strength and Conditioning Association a shout out with that, because he's doing some massive things
Absolutely.
in the States with it. And they've recently had their annual conference, and kudos to Rich. He's been killing it in that space. And something that, like, just in support of what you're saying, is that I suppose one of the challenges we've had in Australia is I've been involved in the high school space since 2009, and I felt then that it was very much in its infancy, and I can still say now that whilst it is gathering a little bit of momentum, it is still a little bit in its infancy when you compare it to the States. And it's an interesting one because exactly what you've said there, I feel like because it is so ingrained in their space, the public schools, it's a part of their budget that they just immediately allocate. Is that a good assumption to say that because it is so ingrained in it that they're happy to, where in Australia, we look at it and go, oh, okay, well, we've got, how much does it cost to fit out a facility? Oh, I didn't think it was going to be that much. Where over there, it's kind of, they understand and they value the worth of it. And that's just what it looks like from afar. Is that something that you'd agree with?
Oh, true. It's so true, Nath. I mean, it's almost like it's not a budget. It's just like they're invested in it, whether it comes into budget or not, and how much more they can do each year. I think it's part of the foundation of the school. You got to have a weight room. You got to have a good sporting program. And it's not just about the sporting success. I think there's elements of how it crosses over from physical education across the board, but they just ground them so early. But it's admirable what the US does in that space.
Yeah, I think it's probably a good segue when it comes to the budgetary side of it. So, you guys PLAE is synonymous with having quality products worldwide. And whilst everyone would love the endless budget that often comes with that you see splashed all over social media and online, for the listeners of the podcast, largely in the development space, what are some of the key focus points you feel every environment can stand true to in evolving their space, from schools, local organisations to the professional space, to make sure that, I suppose, that everyone's got different levels of budget? And what are some of the key focus points that people can kind of, I suppose, have that consistent theme and drive towards in building a quality facility, whatever that means in their context?
Yeah, for sure. I think it's a great question. I think there's probably three key elements before you even get into budget and dollars. You got to have, number one, people. We talk about it all the time internally. Like, our differentiator isn't our product, it's our people. We invest in people, and people make and bring the projects to life. No matter what the vision is, that's also dependent on the person that you're working with. It's the same for me on the school side. When you're building a facility, not everyone knows how to do it, and there's different people that have different expertise. So I think the people are so important first and foremost. And two is what the actual vision is for the space. If the vision is a 10-year plan, but there's an element of the first 2 years, we've got to have a temporary facility and we've got to lead in, then it's just getting the right foundations in place so that you're building and you're future-proofing. Those two things are often overlooked, and they can be elements where they're done in silos. And I've heard on your previous podcast, and it's with no offense to other suppliers at all. That's not what it's about. It's just, it can be, the view could be we're creating a gym when actually we're creating an environment, and it's got to be part of the overall space. That if you're going back onto the US, it's part of that. It's not another separate gym that they're creating. So I think that's super key. I think then the third element that is everything's got to have a budget, but it's how you're going to invest over a period of time. I think there's this element where we got to do it all at once, and that can be detrimental too. You can overcapitalize really early, but you've got to have the key foundational elements in. And that's where we like to be really transparent, is invest right on the core things that are going to get you going and get your programming. And as the program and the facility develops, you've got to show continued investment. You don't want to just put all your eggs in one basket in the first year, and then the next year you don't do anything with it. So it's that, again, operation we talk about, this continuous improvement. You got to get better. I think that's the same thing with how you build your facilities. They're the ones that I go back to Loughborough. That's what I've really loved about that project. It's been a continuous involvement, regardless of their credibility. They've always had a commitment to invest into the future, and that drives success.
Yeah, and I think back to point number 3 of what you've just said there, I've spoken to so many coaches where this actually happens, and I can imagine it'd just be gut wrenching for them, in that because things take a lot of time in schools, and that's just keeping it real and being honest with the listeners out there. They just do, as I'm sure you can relate to. And something that stands out to me is I've spoken to a few coaches along the way. They've built these amazing facilities, and because it takes so long to get across the line, then they've almost outgrown the facility before its completion. And then it's completed and everyone goes, wow, that's awesome. And not only has their program evolved, but you've also got a new facility where students flock to it like bees to a hive, and you've almost outgrown the facility upon its completion. And I think that's exactly what you've just mentioned there about having that vision and the long-term side of it. Schools are investing so much capital into it. And when I say so much capital, I say that with the utmost respect of whatever level that actually looks like. But in support of what you said there in point number 3, it's one of those things of having a long-term vision rather than actually going, okay, we need a new gym. Let's do it. Let's drop it in there now, because I just empathize with those schools who invest in it and then 2 years down the track just go, oh, we've kind of outgrown this space now, haven't we? And then it's back to the drawing board. So exactly what you said, as far as, I think it was the point number 2 where you're talking about the stages of it, then I think that's probably the biggest investment, or I suppose the foresight for schools when they're getting involved in building a facility like this, is having guys like you jump on board and say, okay, well, what's our priority area? Is it getting this done first? In which case it is, and let's get it done first. And then at least stage 2 and stage 3 can be malleable and adaptable in the process along the way. So for those schools that are out there listening to it, I couldn't agree more with what Shane's talking about there when it comes to actually having a longer term vision as opposed.
And the people come into that, like they play such, if you don't have the right people in the room, you're not going to get the long-term vision, and I think that's where we've found our niche is really being a part of that process. It helps us actually be really transparent with, early on, is it actually going to come to life? What you could be trying to do is fit a square peg into a round hole. And sometimes you just got to be honest. And it's so easy to go say, let's do it. But if it doesn't align with your vision, we're no different as a business. We want to make sure it aligns and it's right. It's the right thing to invest in. And then everything else takes care of itself, in my opinion. And you get the success day one rather than it being a speed bump or a hurdle, if that makes sense.
Yeah, for sure. And I suppose at the end of the day, as a business for PLAE, then, that just makes sense for you guys, because at the end of the day, it means that they're, I suppose, for lack of a better term, a satisfied customer. And then it just keeps that relationship continually building along the way.
Yeah, it's all about experience, mate. It could be as pretty as it wants, but it's just purely about the experience for us at the end of the day.
Yeah, totally. And I suppose you mentioned it before, and I'm grateful for you listening to other episodes. So for those of you who are listening to this one in particular, then in episode number 3, I actually detail how to set up a high school facility. So if you haven't listened to episode number 3, it's definitely worth going back, because a lot of the stuff that Shane's talking about right now will really resonate with that and marry up with this episode. So with that being said, a lot of schools are a unique beast to themselves. And what do you see as being some of the unique focal points of establishing a successful school-based performance facility? Because a lot of the time people will go at it and see, the shiny bells and whistles that happen in elite sport. But given that this is very much about the development pathway and athletic development in the youth context, then what are some of the unique things that people need to think about when it comes to fitting out or establishing a successful school-based performance facility?
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head really early. Like, number one, it's youth development. We're not creating a commercial gym where we're trying to attract tons and tons of members and you got to have certain silos. Like, we want to create a community and we want to create a space that people can train in. So the actual environment where it's located, but also the space and size to the programming and the teams you want to get through, the physical education component that may play a part in it, I think is super critical. Number one, that's part of the strategic component. I think the vision piece is so important too. Like, how does it fit into the brand of that school, whether it's public or private? What's your mission statement around it? And how does that tie together with actually whether there is donors or if there's not, but how do you help justify that investment? And having not top down, but the right people in the room from an executive standpoint that actually believe in it. I think that's a fundamentally important piece of the most successful jobs we've had. I think those key things help drive the way forward. They set a really good foundation. Time is the other. Like, it can be easily dismissed. Like, let's get the gym done in 4 to 6 weeks because we need to hit this date. But that can be your worst enemy, because if you don't put the time into the planning with the people, with the experts in the room, with the environment you're trying to create, it's all well and good to set it up to hit a timeline, but you can really only establish that timeline once you've got the foundational elements in place. And that going back to those projects I mentioned before, that was part of the success of them. Like, Shore School was a 5-year journey for us, but we had the performance team, you had Rod, who was the deputy headmaster, the stakeholders across the whole piece were involved. And it meant that when we got to the finish line, regardless of the time it took, everyone was on board and it was successful. And I remember the most satisfying thing was not how it looked for me. It's DK said to me, he's like, I just said to him, hey, how was your first session? Just give it to me straight. Was it good or bad? And he said, no, it was absolutely on point. That's when you've done the planning right and we've got the right outcome. So yeah, they're key things for me as always.
Yeah, and for those who aren't privy to it, I suppose the Shore School, check them out. They've got a really cool Instagram page as well that they display the quality work they're doing in this space. And I think it's really cool that you mentioned that, because as strength and conditioning coaches, it's a very transient industry. And you've mentioned that it took 5 years for that to come to fruition. A lot of people are in jobs for 1 to 2 years before they're moving on. And for a lot of coaches, and I've experienced this as well, where sometimes it can feel like that new gym and stuff like that is the light at the end of the tunnel that is just not attainable. You feel like you're not getting anywhere and things like that. So I'm really glad that you've shared that it actually took 5 years to come to fruition, because people see that, they see it, and check it out. Google the Shore School. That I'll give a shout out to the guys there. They're doing a phenomenal job. And one of the things with that is, it gets kind of spruiked around and, check out the Shore School. People go, oh, wow, look at that. Why can't we have that? But as you said DK, Dave Kennett, who was there at the time, he's the one who actually lasted long enough to share that vision and then walk into a finished facility and really take advantage of that amazing space. Because without a doubt, that's definitely one of the top schools, definitely in Australia, and if not around the world.
I would agree.
When it comes to actually setting a benchmark for it. So for the listeners, if you haven't seen it, check it out, the Shore School, because not only is it a great facility, they're a great bunch of humans and coaches who work there as well. So 2 other points that I wanted to tap into there of what you've mentioned is, you'll hear me say budget a lot, because schools, as any workplace, they've got their constraints and things like that. So to throw my 2 cents into it, there's 2 things that I want the listeners to think about, and particularly the coaches who are actually going down this path. The first one is actually, the more sports that you have involved in the facility, then the greater likelihood that they are in wanting to contribute to it. So if you're only using it for, say, let's just say rugby and rowing, like in Australia, they're the bigger sports that might be the first and foremost to use a strength facility, particularly in the private school setting, then the strength of your actual program, the more sports you bring into it, then those sports can often have fundraising and support groups and things like that that begin to see the value in it, and then they can contribute to it knowing that you've outgrown that particular space itself. And the second thing that I'll say to that too, which a lot of coaches overlook this, is as strength and conditioning coaches, athletic development coaches in a schooling space, your number one priority should be to engage with the community. And from my experience at a former school, that meant actually running mothers groups and things like that out of the facility. So the reason why I'm highlighting this is because if there's more people involved from a community aspect, they see the value in physical activity and what that actually brings. So not only do you have multiple sports then prepared to actually contribute to it, but you've also got other parties, key stakeholders, and there's no other more important key stakeholder than a parent in a school that often actually see the benefit of it as well, that they're likely to invest in that space too. I suppose in finishing up, because I know you're a busy guy, mate, and you've got a lot of things on your plate. The last question I've got for you prior to getting into the power round, which I'm excited to hear your thoughts on, is from your experience, what do you think are the top 3 mistakes that schools will often make? So you've mentioned about the vision and things like that. If there were 3 things that stuck out and came to the forefront of your mind, what are 3 mistakes that schools will often make in venturing down the path of either building or expanding an athletic development space?
I'd say mistakes. Look, I see as opportunities, but I'm just optimistic as always. But I see, like, number one, I definitely say to the vision piece, and it's not when I say vision, it's not like what are we trying to gain from this facility? Is like there's a gym, but some people just think a gym, different stakeholders, and that's just an experience piece. So vision and people, number one, got to get the right people in the room. I'd say number 2 is the space, and it could be either overcapitalized or overcomplicated. Like we've mentioned Shaw, and it's a brand new build, don't get me wrong, but it actually is a great space. And there's still a lot of new builds we've done where the space is actually really hard to work around. On the other hand, Kings is a recent project we've just completed. They used existing space. They've been able to create this outdoor environment around them, but they've done it on a completely different budget, So I think space is a key thing. Make sure your vision aligns with your space and what you're trying to achieve. And number 3, and I know you've mentioned budget, is invest right and invest over a period of time. Don't just overcapitalize all at once. That'd be my big 3 that I continue to go back to on. I'd say they are mistakes because I think they can be perceptions, but if you have the right people in the room, they all become opportunities, and it comes down to having the right people in the room to draft, to put the framework together to make it successful.
Yeah, for sure. I couldn't agree more with you. And I hope you don't mind me saying this too, because I think there's another piece to this puzzle, and we've had extensive conversations about this as well. So something to add to those 3, and because this is something that I've been directly involved with, and thanks to yourself as well, as far as going down that consulting route for schools, because the reason why I'm highlighting this is because for me, and I often hear this a lot throughout the industry too, is the number one mistake that I see is that schools don't actually have a vision for their athletic development and necessarily what the programming and the coaching looks like. Because, and you can agree or disagree with me on this one, mate, I suppose some schools see the value in it, they go guns blazing at it, but they actually don't have a coach in that particular setting, and they don't actually have a programming model. So for the listeners out there, in episode number 1, I actually go through and talk about programming for youth in the high school setting. So if you don't have, a vision, or you want a greater clarity for the schools who are listening to this in building facilities, then have a listen to episode number 1, because it actually highlights the importance of, before you build anything, having a vision of what that actually looks like. And you've used the word vision multiple times, but I think without actually having some form of athletic development program or system or model in place, then it certainly sets up, either further opportunities, as you've said, or a little bit of heartache down the track when it comes to actually building and investing in that space.
Yeah, mate, I align with that because you have to invest in people, and to get the program set, you have to have the right people that are leading it, and no vision exists without the people. So, yeah, absolutely couldn't agree more. They go hand in hand for me.
Awesome. Okay, so we're on to the fun stuff now, mate, which I'm really looking forward to seeing because
I'm nervous about this.
I'll be honest with the listeners, I'm a bit of a weirdo when it comes to just seeing how people's minds work and things like that. And so every guest that we'll have on the guest episodes or the bonus episodes, then we finish the episode with a power round. And so what the power round is, you can either respond by just simply one word, or you can respond by a quick sentence of what these actually mean to you. So I'm going to throw 3 words, I suppose, out to you of what these actually are. And I just want to see what comes to your head because I'm interested in hearing how your mind works. So the first one being human performance.
Inspiring people to do what they love longer in life.
Awesome. What about budget?
Investment.
And then the final one I've got for you is connection.
I'd say sharing a common ground and values that establishes relationship.
Awesome. I love it, mate. Well, in keeping true to my promise, I won't keep you any longer, but I just wanted to say a massive, massive thank you to Shane Gooneratne from PLAE. You guys have done a phenomenal job in the industry, and not only in building facilities, but just as coaches and investing in the actual industry itself, through from, your road shows through to different conferences, sponsoring certain things, and even sponsoring this podcast, which I'm extremely grateful for. I just wanted to say on behalf of the industry, massive, massive thank you to PLAE, and an even bigger shout out and thanks to you, Shane, for giving up your time for the listeners today.
Mate, I appreciate it. We appreciate what you do for the industry, mate. So thanks for having us and appreciate all the support.
Thanks very much, mate. Cheers.
Appreciate it.
Thank you to GymAware, the #1 velocity-based training company on the market, for bringing you the guest episodes. Don't forget to check out their Flex devices with the link in the show notes and take advantage of the opportunity exclusive to the Get Down listeners, being 5% off Flex devices using the code GETDOWN5, being the number 5 at checkout. A big thanks once again to our platinum sponsor, the team at PLAE, for sponsoring the Get Down podcast. Be sure to visit plae.us or our show notes for further information.
1,